CEO story, adopting two abandoned kids, overcoming challenges, and a heartwarming ending adoption story. Welcome to Stories TH. In today's emotional adoption story, we dive into the life of a man who unexpectedly became a father to two children in need of love. This powerful adoption story shows how family can be formed not by blood, but by heart. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Stories TH, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our incredible stories. Stay tuned for more heartwarming moments. At 38, Daniel Brooks had it all: wealth, success, and a position at the helm of one of the most prominent companies in the industry. His name was synonymous with high-profile business deals, innovation, and an ever-growing portfolio of acquisitions. On paper, he had achieved everything one could dream of: the big house, the luxury cars, the private jets, and a seemingly perfect life. He was a self-made man, a leader, and a symbol of success. Yet, something was missing: an emptiness that he couldn't shake off. Despite the accolades, the boardroom victories, and the endless praise from colleagues and clients, Daniel felt like he was trapped in a routine. The excitement that once fueled his ambition had turned into monotony. Each deal, no matter how large, left him feeling more hollow than the last. His achievements, which had once brought him joy, now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the cold, empty satisfaction of ticking off boxes on a checklist of accomplishments. He could no longer find joy in the things that once brought him pleasure. The lavish parties, the expensive dinners, the constant flow of new projects, it all felt meaningless. He would go through the motions, smiling and nodding, but inside, there was a quiet despair. He had spent his entire life chasing success, believing that once he reached the top, everything would fall into place. But now that he was there, he realized that success was just a shell, and the person he had become was nothing more than an image crafted for the world to admire. Daniel had spent years building his empire, focusing on the next big deal, the next acquisition. He had poured his heart and soul into his company, and in the process, he had forgotten who he was outside of the boardroom. The more successful he became, the more isolated he felt. His relationships had deteriorated over time, his family had drifted away, and he had no real friends left to confide in. His only companions were the people who admired his wealth and status, but they were more interested in what he could do for them than in who he was as a person. He sat in his luxurious office, gazing out the window at the city skyline. The lights of the buildings shimmered like stars, but to Daniel, they felt cold and distant. He had everything he thought he wanted, yet he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to life than this: something deeper, something more authentic. But what was it? He couldn't quite put his finger on it. All he knew was that the life he had built for himself was no longer enough. His phone buzzed with a reminder for his next meeting, a routine he had grown all too accustomed to. He had learned to live his life in blocks of scheduled time, each hour filled with meetings, calls, and negotiations. But today, something was different. As he picked up the phone and glanced at the agenda, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The thought of another meeting, another deal, made his stomach churn. He didn't want to do it anymore. He had spent so much of his life in pursuit of success, but now, success felt like a burden. As he leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, Daniel's mind began to wander. He thought back to his younger years, before the corporate world had swallowed him whole. He had once dreamed of living a life of meaning, a life where he could make a real difference in the world. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had been overshadowed by the need for power and recognition. Now, he wondered if it was too late to change. Could he still find purpose, or had he already sold his soul to the pursuit of success? The answer wasn't clear, but the feeling of emptiness continued to gnaw at him. It wasn't just about the money or the status, it was about something deeper, something he couldn't grasp. He needed to find that spark again, the fire that had driven him when he was younger. But where did he begin? And, more importantly, did he even know who he truly was anymore? The thought consumed him for the next few days. He started questioning his life choices, the people he had surrounded himself with, and the decisions that had brought him to this point. He realized that he had become a prisoner of his own success. The more he achieved, the less connected he felt to his own humanity. He was living for everyone else: his investors, his clients, his colleagues, but not for himself. One evening, after another long day in the office, Daniel found himself driving aimlessly through the city. His mind was racing, and he needed a moment to clear his head. He ended up at a park, an old place he used to visit when he was younger, before life had gotten complicated. The park was quiet, with only a few people walking their dogs or sitting on benches. As he sat on a bench and watched the sunset, he felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The calmness of the park made him realize something. He had been so caught up in the hustle of life that he had forgotten to live. He had been living for the future, always chasing the next goal, the next achievement, without ever stopping to appreciate the present. He had been so focused on building his empire that he had lost touch with the simple joys of life, the beauty of nature, the joy of human connection, the satisfaction of a job well done for the right reasons. It was in that moment, as he sat on the bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, that Daniel made a decision. He would take a break from the corporate world. He would step back and reevaluate his life, his priorities, and his purpose. He didn't know exactly what he would do, but he knew that he needed to reconnect with himself and with what truly mattered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. Daniel stepped down from his position as CEO and took a sabbatical. He spent time with his family, reconnected with old friends, and started volunteering at local charities. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of fulfillment that had nothing to do with money or power. He found joy in helping others, in making a difference in people's lives, and in rediscovering the things he had lost along the way. As the months passed, Daniel realized that the emptiness he had once felt was starting to fade. He had discovered a new sense of purpose, one that didn't depend on his bank account or his business deals. He found meaning in the relationships he had neglected, in the small moments of joy, and in the work that allowed him to give back to others. He had found a new way to live, one that was more aligned with who he truly was. Daniel had learned a valuable lesson. The pursuit of success was important, but it could not be the only thing that defined him. True success, he realized, was not about the money, the power, or the recognition. It was about the people you helped, the love you shared, and the impact you had on the world around you. It was about being true to yourself and finding meaning in the journey, not just the destination. As he sat in his favorite park once again, Daniel felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had found his way back to the person he had always been deep down. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to walk it with purpose and clarity. Success was no longer about the accolades or the wealth. It was about living a life of authenticity, connection, and meaning. And that, Daniel realized, was the greatest achievement of all. After weeks of feeling disconnected from his own life, Daniel Brooks made a decision. He needed to do something different. Something that would pull him out of his rigid routine and remind him that life was more than just deals and spreadsheets. It was the company's annual charity event, and although he dreaded the idea of attending yet another corporate gathering, he couldn't bring himself to cancel. It was, after all, for a good cause. The idea of doing something tangible for others, something outside the cold walls of his office, felt like a step in the right direction. Maybe, just maybe, it could offer him a sense of purpose that he'd been missing. He arrived at the children's home later in the afternoon, the sun low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling event. The atmosphere was far from the corporate dinners and gala nights he was used to. Instead of tuxedos and high heels, the air was filled with the laughter of children, their smiles wide and innocent. Tables were decorated with colorful balloons, and volunteers milled about with stacks of food and gifts. Daniel walked through the crowd, his sharp, tailored suit standing in stark contrast to the casual, joyful energy around him. A voice from behind interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to see the children's dining hall before you leave? They're having dinner now." The director, a kind-faced woman with a warm smile, greeted him. Daniel nodded absent-mindedly, already zoning out as she led him through the brightly painted corridors. They passed walls lined with artwork, bright, childlike drawings of animals and flowers, and Daniel couldn't help but smile at the carefree creativity. He walked alongside the director, not quite paying attention to her as she explained the various programs offered at the children's home. His mind was elsewhere, lost in his usual sea of thoughts about work, the next big deal, and how everything was starting to feel pointless. Then they reached the dining hall. The noise hit him immediately: laughter, chatter, the clatter of silverware, and yet, amid the chaos, there were two children who stood out. At the far end of the room, almost tucked away in the corner, sat two boys, identical twins, perhaps 6 years old. They weren't laughing or playing with the other kids. They were quiet, their small bodies hunched over bowls of soup, eyes downcast, their fingers methodically stirring the contents. They shared occasional, soft whispers between them, but for the most part, they were silent. The other children were lost in their own worlds of chatter and excitement, but these two boys seemed out of place. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off them. There was something about their stillness, their distance from the rest of the group, that drew him in. He couldn't explain why, but something about them felt oddly familiar, something that tugged at him, deep in his chest. It was as though he knew them, or rather, they knew him, though he was certain they'd never met. Who are they? Daniel found himself asking the director, his voice lower than usual, as if not wanting to break the fragile stillness surrounding them. Ryan and Luke Parker, she replied. They're not residents here, though. They attend our after-school program while their aunt works long shifts at the hospital. Daniel's brow furrowed as he looked at the boys. There was something more, something hidden behind their solemn expressions that made his heart race. He couldn't quite place it, but it was almost as if fate had led him here, to this exact moment. The director continued speaking, but Daniel wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the twins, who were now looking up at him, as though sensing his presence. Their eyes, dark and deep, met his with a strange composure for children so young. Despite their quiet demeanor, they seemed fully aware of his presence. In that moment, it felt like the world around them had quieted, as if he and the twins were the only people in the room. He approached them slowly, almost without thinking, crouching down to their level. The children didn't look away. They simply continued to study him, their faces unreadable. "Hello," Daniel said, his voice a little softer now, almost as if speaking to fragile things. "I'm Daniel." "I'm Ryan," said the first boy, his voice quiet but clear. He looked up at Daniel with steady eyes, not at all shy, just thoughtful. "And I'm Luke," the second boy added, his gaze also unwavering, though his voice had a faint tremor, like he was unsure of this strange interaction but not scared by it. Daniel gave a slight nod. "Do you like the soup?" he asked, immediately regretting the banality of the question. It seemed so trivial, so irrelevant compared to the connection he felt in that moment. "It's okay," Ryan shrugged. "But Susan's soup is better," he added casually. "She's the one who makes the soup. She works today, though." Daniel smiled at the casual mention of someone named Susan, almost distracted by the mention of a name. But his attention quickly returned to the twins. "Your clothes look a bit big for you," Daniel remarked gently, noticing their sweaters and jackets were several sizes too large, hanging awkwardly on their small frames. "We're growing into them," Luke responded with an unexpected dignity, his words clear and mature for his age, as though he had said this many times before. An impulse stirred in Daniel, one that he couldn't explain. It was as if a part of him, a part of his own life, buried somewhere deep, had awakened. Without thinking, he asked, "Would you like new clothes? I could get you some, if you'd like." Before Ryan or Luke could answer, the director stepped in, gently placing a hand on Daniel's arm. "Mr. Brooks, perhaps we should continue the tour. The children will finish their dinner soon." But Daniel, unable to tear himself away, lingered for a moment longer, looking at the twins. Something inside him was awakening, something he hadn't felt in years, an urge to care, to protect. It was foreign to him, yet so natural at the same time. 2 days later, Daniel returned to the children's home. This time, he had bags of carefully selected clothes, bright, colorful sweaters, jeans, shoes that would fit the twins perfectly. When Ryan and Luke saw the gifts, their eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and hesitation. They had probably never been given anything like this, especially not from a stranger. "Try them on," Daniel encouraged with a smile. The boys hesitated for a moment before reaching for the clothes. As Luke pulled on the sleeves of a sweater, his arm lifted slightly, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark on his wrist. The mark was unmistakable. It was identical to the one Daniel had on his own wrist, and the one he had always believed was a rare family trait passed down through the Mitchell men. Daniel froze. His heart raced. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't possible. How could it be? He glanced quickly at Ryan, who had just taken off his old sweater and was about to put on the new one. As the fabric shifted, Daniel saw it, another crescent-shaped birthmark, exactly the same as Luke's. And his brothers. The world around Daniel seemed to tilt slightly. He felt as though he had just been thrust into a different reality, one he couldn't understand but couldn't deny either. "That's an interesting birthmark," Daniel said softly, his voice suddenly tight, betraying the turmoil inside him. "Yeah, our daddy had the same one," Luke said, his words so matter-of-fact, so casual that it sent a chill through Daniel. "Your daddy's name?" Daniel whispered, though he already knew the answer. "Michael Parker," Ryan answered, looking up at him with those steady eyes. Daniel's chest tightened. Michael was my brother." The words barely left his lips before the ground seemed to shift beneath him. His brother's name, Michael Parker, was not just a memory of a lost loved one. It was a bridge to the children before him, children he never knew existed. Daniel stared at the twins, his heart racing, his mind swirling. These boys, these quiet, reserved boys with the identical birthmarks, were his family he never knew existed. His hands shook as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone to check the contact details of the DNA testing facility. It felt surreal, but it wasn't just the birthmarks that connected them. There was something deeper, something undeniable. The twins, Ryan and Luke, were his blood. His mind raced as he processed this revelation. What did it mean? How could this have happened? Where had his brother been? And why had he not known about them? But the truth was undeniable. These boys were part of his family. And now, for better or for worse, Daniel Brooks was bound to them. As the days passed, Daniel couldn't help but return to the children's home. Something about Ryan and Luke lingered in his mind, a connection that felt deeper than mere curiosity. The twins had become a puzzle he was desperate to solve, and no matter how much he tried to focus on his work or the business of running the company, his thoughts kept drifting back to them. Every moment he spent with them felt like it was pulling him further into their world, further away from the lonely path he had been on before. Daniel's visits became routine. He would show up at the children's home in the evenings, sometimes with more clothes, sometimes with small toys or snacks. He found himself talking to them more often, learning about their likes and dislikes, their favorite games, and the things that made them smile. Ryan, the quieter of the two, had a serious air about him, while Luke was the more playful, with a mischievous glint in his eyes that reminded Daniel of his own childhood. They both had their own distinct personalities, yet there was an unspoken bond between them, a calmness that Daniel couldn't explain. But it wasn't just their personalities that caught his attention, it was the uncanny resemblance they bore to his family. There were moments when Daniel would watch them and see fragments of his brother Michael in their faces. Michael, who had died years ago, far too young, taken by an illness that had left Daniel with only memories. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at a piece of Michael he had long since lost, something that had slipped through the cracks of his life without him even realizing it. The birthmarks, of course, were the first thing that had caught his attention. He hadn't been able to get them out of his mind since that day in the children's home when he first saw them. The crescent-shaped mark that Ryan and Luke shared, identical to the one Daniel himself bore, was impossible to ignore. The more he thought about it, the more he found it strange that he had never known about the boys before. But the connection, however surreal it felt, was undeniable. Daniel's thoughts were clouded with questions. How could he have not known about these children? How could his brother, Michael, have had kids, and yet Daniel had never been told? How had something as significant as this slipped through the cracks? Daniel was overwhelmed with emotions he hadn't felt in years. The confusion, the shock, and the sudden surge of protectiveness toward the twins left him breathless. His initial shock gave way to an undeniable compulsion to learn more. He needed to know everything, every detail about Ryan and Luke, about Michael's life before he passed away. He couldn't ignore the feeling that there was a deeper connection here, one he had missed all these years. So, Daniel did something he hadn't done in a long time. He asked questions. He sat down with the children's home director one afternoon, trying to gather any information he could. "Tell me more about their mother," he asked, his voice betraying the uncertainty he was feeling. "What happened to her?" The director, a kind woman named Margaret, hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Their mother, Emma, died during childbirth. It was a difficult pregnancy, and we've been taking care of them ever since. Their aunt, Susan, is the one who looks after them now. She works at the hospital, long hours, so the boys come here after school." Daniel absorbed the information, his mind racing. "So, Their mother was gone, and they had been living with their aunt. But where was their father in all this? He was certain the twins had mentioned something about a father, but he needed to know more. The more Daniel dug, the more questions kept piling up. He found himself reaching out to the small, faded records he could find on Michael's life. There were gaps, places where information seemed to have vanished, and in those gaps, Daniel began to uncover the pieces of a story that had remained hidden for far too long. After some time, he managed to get his hands on a file, one that had been tucked away in a box labeled Michael Parker. The file was dusty, the pages yellowed with age, but as Daniel sifted through the documents, his heart began to pound. There it was, buried in the middle of the paperwork, Michael's last will and testament. Daniel's hands shook as he read through the legal jargon, but what caught his eye was a note at the bottom, written by Michael himself, just months before his death. Please, take care of my sons. Ryan and Luke are my heart. I couldn't be there for them, but I hope you will be. Daniel's throat tightened as he read the words. The implications were staggering. Michael had known that something would happen to him, that his time was running out, and he had wanted Daniel to step in, to be there for the children. Daniel felt the weight of his brother's final request pressing down on him. But how had Daniel missed this? How had he failed to see the signs, to understand what Michael had been trying to tell him? As Daniel continued reading, his suspicions grew stronger. There, buried in the paperwork, was a reference to a phone call Michael had made to Daniel's office shortly after learning about Emma's pregnancy. The call had never reached Daniel. It had been intercepted by none other than Gerald, Daniel's uncle. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Gerald had intentionally kept this information from Daniel. He had kept the existence of the twins a secret, manipulating the situation to maintain control over the family's finances and assets. Daniel's stomach churned as he read more, piecing together the cruel truth. Gerald had known about the boys, and he had deliberately kept Daniel in the dark, ensuring that Daniel would never learn about his nephews until it was too late. Daniel's mind raced with fury and disbelief. His uncle, the man who had always been his mentor, the one who had guided him after their parents' deaths, had betrayed him. And in doing so, he had kept Daniel from the two most important people in his life, his family, his blood. But it didn't stop there. The more Daniel uncovered, the more he realized that Gerald had been using his influence to manipulate everything around him. Gerald had restructured the family's inheritance, making himself the primary decision-maker until Daniel reached a certain age. The twins, had they been introduced into the family sooner, would have immediately taken away Gerald's power. He had done everything he could to keep them from Daniel, to keep the family fortune within his grasp. And then, the final blow, the twins' birth certificates. Michael's name was listed as the father. But there was more. A note on the side of the document suggested that Michael had made multiple attempts to reach Daniel after he had learned about the pregnancy, but all of his calls and letters had been intercepted by Gerald. Daniel sat back in his chair, the weight of the revelation nearly overwhelming him. His brother had been trying to reach him, trying to bring him into his life before he passed, but Gerald had kept him from knowing the truth. The anger that built up inside Daniel was suffocating, but it was mixed with a deep sense of loss. His brother's final years had been filled with struggle and regret, and Daniel had never been there for him. And now, the children, his nephews, were living with a painful truth they didn't even know about. Daniel had spent his whole life building an empire, but in doing so, he had neglected the most important thing of all, his family. And now, in the aftermath of this revelation, he realized that the family he had lost wasn't just a memory. It was standing right in front of him. Ryan and Luke were his responsibility now, and he had to make things right. He couldn't undo the past, but he could fight for their future. As the truth settled in, Daniel knew one thing for certain. His life had just taken a turn he never saw coming, and he was ready to face it head on. The more Daniel uncovered about his family, the more the sense of betrayal deepened. He had always looked up to his uncle Victor. Victor had been a father figure after their parents died, guiding Daniel through the complex world of business and family responsibility. He had trusted him implicitly, believing Victor's advice was always in his best interest. But now, the more he dug into the documents, the more it became clear that Victor's guidance had always been self-serving, and his loyalty to Daniel had never been as genuine as it seemed. Daniel's first suspicion had been a faint one. When he discovered the twins, Ryan and Luke, and their connection to his late brother Michael, He had been shocked not only by the sudden revelation of his nephews, but by the realization that he had been kept in the dark about them for so long. The birthmarks had triggered something in him, but as he spent more time with the twins, questions began to surface about how they had ended up in the children's home, how they had been cared for, and, most importantly, why they had never been brought to him. The answers were slow to come, but soon enough, they were undeniable. Every path Daniel took in his investigation led him back to one person, Victor. It started innocently enough. Daniel had requested records and files about Michael's death, trying to piece together the last few years of his brother's life. He had assumed that the information would be straightforward, just another task to confirm details about his family. But what he found instead were layers upon layers of documents marked with names he didn't recognize, notes he didn't remember, and instructions that seemed to ignore his involvement altogether. Victor had been the executor of Michael's estate, a role he had assumed after their parents' deaths. But as Daniel sifted through the papers, he began to notice an unsettling pattern. Victor had kept all the important documents, letters, messages, even calls from Michael to Daniel, hidden away. There were signs that Michael had tried repeatedly to reach Daniel, especially after Emma's pregnancy, but Victor had intercepted and blocked every attempt. The discovery was like a gut punch. It all started to click when Daniel found the first letter. It was an old envelope, tucked between financial documents, with Michael's familiar handwriting. But the letter was dated years ago, just before Michael had passed away. Daniel's fingers trembled as he unfolded it. The letter was brief but urgent. Michael spoke of his impending illness and his desperate attempts to reach Daniel, to tell him about his children. But the final line of the letter was the one that cut through Daniel like a knife. "I've tried to reach you 100 times, but Uncle Victor is blocking me. He says you're too busy for me. He's the one stopping you from knowing about Ryan and Luke. They are yours to know, not his to control." Daniel's heart pounded as the weight of Michael's words sank in. Victor had known about the twins. And worse, he had deliberately kept Daniel from knowing. The letters were only the beginning. The more Daniel dug, the more he uncovered. Victor had not only blocked Michael's communication with him, but had also made sure that Daniel never knew about the boys. There were records of calls to Daniel's office, every one of them marked unanswered, with notations that they had been forwarded to Victor instead. There were letters, dozens of them marked, returned to sender, each one written by Michael and never received by Daniel. But the truly damning evidence came when Daniel discovered a series of meeting minutes from their family's trust committee. Victor had pushed through several decisions in the years after Michael's death, restructuring the family's trust and company holdings in ways that kept him at the top of the chain of command. In those records, Daniel found references to keeping the family fortune intact, but also to maintaining the current leadership, a phrase that, in retrospect, now made Daniel's blood run cold. Victor had made sure that Daniel's name was removed from key decisions, ensuring that Daniel couldn't inherit the full estate until he was older and until he had a family of his own. The idea of the twins being introduced into the family, introducing new heirs, was a threat to Victor's control over everything. As Daniel continued to read through the documents, his stomach twisted with fury. Victor had been playing a long game, all along. Not only had he been suppressing Daniel's relationship with the twins, but he had also been manipulating every aspect of their family's fortune to suit his own interests. For years, he had kept Daniel at arm's length, all while building his own influence. This betrayal was far worse than anything Daniel could have imagined. For so long, he had trusted Victor. He had been so certain that his uncle was guiding him in the right direction, helping him navigate the complicated world of business and family legacy. But now, Daniel saw the truth. Victor had been manipulating him, using their family's fortune and his status as a mentor to keep control over everything. He hadn't just kept the twins from Daniel, he had kept the entire family's future in his own hands. The anger that boiled up in Daniel was unlike anything he had ever felt before. How could Victor, who had always been the one to show him the ropes, have been so cold, so calculating? Daniel's trust had been shattered, his view of his family forever altered. He had always believed that family meant loyalty, that it meant protecting one another. But Victor's actions had proved that loyalty was a commodity to be traded, and Daniel had been nothing more than a pawn in his uncle's twisted game. It wasn't just about the money, either. The realization that Victor had intentionally kept Daniel from the twins and from his own blood was what really tore him apart. How could Victor have known that Michael's children were out there, struggling, and yet not say anything? How could he have allowed them to grow up in a children's home, unaware of their own family? How could he have stood by and let Daniel miss out on the most important thing in his life, his family? The more Daniel thought about it, the more he realized that Victor had always seen him as a tool, as a means to an end. He had been the one to groom Daniel for leadership, but only because it suited his own desires for control. And when it came down to it, he didn't want Daniel to have a family of his own. The twins would have disrupted the power structure that Victor had built, and so they had been hidden away, out of sight, out of mind. The realization hit Daniel hard. Victor had never truly cared for him. He had never been the supportive, loving mentor Daniel had thought him to be. He was simply another man in the world of business who would stop at nothing to hold on to power. But this was no longer just about betrayal. It was about family, about the children who were rightfully his nephews. Daniel had no intention of letting Victor's manipulation go unchallenged. He couldn't undo the years of control Victor had exercised, but he could make things right for Ryan and Luke. They deserved to know their family. They deserved to have a future that wasn't dictated by lies and deceit. The fury in Daniel's chest grew as he realized what he had to do next. He would fight for the twins. He would confront Victor, no matter the cost. And he would expose the truth about everything that had happened in the years that had been stolen from him. Daniel's resolve hardened like steel. The betrayal was deep, but it was time to put an end to it. The secrets had been kept long enough, and it was time for the truth to come to light, no matter how dark or painful it was. The day Daniel walked into the courthouse, he knew his life had already changed forever. What had begun as a simple attempt to help his nephews Ryan and Luke had quickly escalated into something far more complicated. The fight for guardianship of the twins was no longer just about taking care of two children he barely knew. It had become a battle for justice, a fight against the lies, manipulations, and betrayals that had plagued his family for far too long. 4 weeks now, Daniel had been preparing himself for this moment, poring over legal documents, consulting with attorneys, and trying to anticipate every move his uncle Victor would make. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't just the legal battle that weighed heavily on Daniel's shoulders. He still had to manage his role as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, a responsibility that left little room for personal matters. But his heart wasn't in the business anymore. His focus was entirely on the twins. The thought of them growing up without a family, without a future, was enough to keep him fighting, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. As the days inched closer to the court date, Daniel felt the pressure mounting. Victor, his once beloved mentor, had no intention of letting go of the control he had so carefully nurtured over the years. The manipulation, the secrecy, it had all been a means for Victor to maintain his power, not only over Daniel's family fortune, but also over the lives of the twins. Victor's fingerprints were all over every obstacle Daniel encountered, every piece of information that had been hidden from him. But Daniel wasn't about to let Victor's games continue. He knew that he was walking into a fight he couldn't afford to lose. The stakes were higher than ever. Not only was this about his right to raise his nephews, but it was about exposing Victor for the fraud he was. It was about justice, about proving to Ryan and Luke that his family was worth fighting for. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with the tension of what was to come. Daniel took a seat at the plaintiff's table, his mind racing. He couldn't help but glance at the empty chairs beside him where Ryan and Luke should have been sitting. He had fought to have them with him in the courtroom, but Victor's legal team had managed to block their attendance. The sight of their empty chairs felt like a reminder of all the ways they had been kept in the shadows, away from their true family. Victor walked into the room with his usual confident stride, a smug smile playing at the corners of his lips. He still carried himself like a king, as though the family fortune and the company were his to command. Daniel's heart tightened as he met his uncle's gaze. The man who had once been a father figure to him, the one he had trusted above all others, was now his fiercest enemy. Victor's attorney, a slick, well-groomed man with a sharp suit, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we are here today to discuss the guardianship of the twins, Ryan and Luke. My client, Mr. Victor Green, is the rightful guardian of these children. He has cared for them since their mother's death and has acted in their best interest at all times." Daniel could feel the bile rise in his throat. He could already tell where this was headed. Victor's lawyers had been working overtime to paint him as an unfit guardian. They would try to exploit every weakness they could find: his workaholic tendencies, his lack of parenting experience, his past mistakes. It didn't matter to them that Daniel had been blind to the twins' existence or that he had only recently discovered the truth. To them, he was a businessman, a stranger to family life. Daniel's attorney, a seasoned family law lawyer named Grace, stood to counter their claims. "Your Honor, my client, Daniel Brooks, is the biological uncle of Ryan and Luke. He has made it clear that he is fully committed to raising them. He has already begun the process of integrating them into his life, providing them with a stable home and the resources they need to thrive." She paused for a moment, looking directly at the judge. "Mr. Brooks has a right to raise his family, and we are here to ensure that he can do so without interference from anyone, including his uncle." The words stung more than Daniel had anticipated. The tension in the room thickened as Victor's lawyer stood to object. "Objection, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "Mr. Brooks is a successful businessman, yes, but he has no experience raising children. His work schedule is demanding, and he has made it clear in previous statements that his focus has always been on his career, not family. How can he be expected to care for the twins when he can't even prioritize their well-being over his work?" The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, nodded thoughtfully before addressing the courtroom. "Mr. Brooks, can you speak to these concerns?" Daniel stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of it all felt overwhelming. He had never felt so exposed in his life. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting for his response. He cleared his throat and spoke from the heart. "I understand the concerns being raised. I won't pretend that I'm perfect or that I've always made the right choices. But what I will say is this: I love those boys. I've only just met them, and yet I feel a bond with them that I can't explain. I've seen firsthand how hard they've had it, how much they've been through, and I won't let anyone keep them from having a better life. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to be the uncle they deserve." He paused for a moment, glancing at the empty chairs again, imagining Ryan and Luke sitting there beside him, supporting him in this fight. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "It's about giving them a future where they know they are loved, where they have a family that will be there for them no matter what. I'm ready to step up, and I'm asking for the chance to do so." The room fell silent for a few seconds, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt as though he had said everything he needed to say. But then Victor stood up, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Your Honor, I understand Daniel's sentiments. But the truth is, he's an untested father figure. He's never been part of their lives, and it's clear that he's doing this out of guilt, not out of genuine concern for these children's well-being. I have been their guardian since their mother's death. I have provided for them, kept them safe, and given them everything they need. This is nothing more than a midlife crisis on Mr. Brooks' part." The words hit Daniel like a slap in the face. Victor had always been good at manipulating a room, and his calm, measured words were laced with just enough truth to make the judge pause. But Daniel wasn't going to let his uncle's lies win. He was in this for the twins, not for his own ego or sense of guilt. Grace stood up again to argue, but the judge raised a hand to stop her. "I think we've heard enough for today. I'll need time to review the evidence before making a decision. This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The tension in the courtroom didn't dissipate as the proceedings adjourned. Daniel was left standing there, his thoughts swirling. The emotional weight of the battle was beginning to sink in. He was fighting for Ryan and Luke's future, and he was going to have to do whatever it took to win. But as he walked out of the courthouse, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. Victor wasn't going to give up easily, and the legal fight for guardianship would only grow more intense. Daniel wasn't just fighting for the twins. He was fighting for the truth against the lies, the manipulation, and the family that had kept him in the dark for far too long. As the weight of the battle pressed down on him, Daniel knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened in that courtroom, he wasn't backing down. Ryan and Luke were his family, and he was going to fight for them with everything he had. The legal battle for guardianship of Ryan and Luke had stretched on for weeks, and the pressure was beginning to take its toll on Daniel. Each day brought a new wave of challenges, more documents to review, more arguments in court, more attempts by Victor's team to undermine his ability to provide for the twins. But despite all the distractions, despite the ever-growing weight of the legal fight, Daniel found himself drawn deeper into the twins' lives. His work at the company, once his sole focus, now seemed like a distant concern. The long hours he had once spent in boardrooms, attending meetings, and closing deals were now replaced by moments spent with Ryan and Luke. He had promised them a future where they knew they were loved and valued, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone stand in the way of that. At first, it had been difficult. He didn't know the twins as well as he would have liked, and they didn't know him either. There were awkward silences, tentative smiles, and a hesitation in their interactions. They had both been through so much, losing their mother, living in a children's home, and growing up without the knowledge of a larger family. But Daniel was determined to change that. He wanted them to feel safe, to feel like they belonged, and most of all, he wanted to show them what it meant to have a family. Every day, he made time for them. Even though his schedule was packed with legal meetings and court dates, he found himself leaving work early to help them with their homework, to play their favorite games, or simply to sit together and talk. He had no experience as a father, and he often found himself stumbling over words or unsure of what to do. But what he lacked in experience, he made up for with effort. Slowly, the walls the twins had built around themselves began to crumble. They started to open up to him, sharing bits of their lives that they had kept hidden away for so long. On one particular afternoon, Daniel found himself sitting on the floor with Ryan and Luke, surrounded by scattered crayons and a half-finished coloring book. He was supposed to be reviewing some legal documents, but today, the kids were his priority. He smiled as Ryan carefully colored in the lines of a dinosaur, while Luke, ever the perfectionist, took his time with every stroke, ensuring his picture looked just right. There was something so pure about these moments, something so deeply human, that it grounded Daniel in a way nothing else had. It reminded him that family wasn't just about blood or legal papers, it was about these small moments, these everyday connections that formed the foundation of a lasting bond. "Uncle Daniel, look," Luke said, holding up his dinosaur drawing with pride. "Do you think it looks like a real T-Rex?" Daniel laughed softly. "It looks perfect, buddy. You're a natural artist." Ryan looked up from his own page, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Can we show Miss Rachel? She said we should color our pictures and bring them to school tomorrow." Rachel. The name had become a constant in Daniel's life over the past few weeks. She was the twins' teacher, a kind, compassionate woman who had taken a genuine interest in their well-being. She had been a stabilizing force for the boys in the midst of the chaos. Not only was she dedicated to their education, but she also seemed to have a unique way of reaching them emotionally, offering them the comfort and stability they so desperately needed. Daniel had met Rachel at a parent-teacher conference a few weeks prior, long before the custody battle had become all-consuming. He had been impressed by her professionalism, her warmth, and the way she spoke about Ryan and Luke with such care. She wasn't just their teacher. She was someone who truly understood them, someone who had been a constant presence in their lives. Rachel was the one who had noticed the signs of their struggles in the classroom, who had gently encouraged Daniel to take a more active role in their lives, and who had reassured him that the boys were resilient, they just needed time to heal. In the midst of all the legal drama, Daniel found himself leaning on Rachel for support. It wasn't just about the twins anymore, it was about him, too. He didn't know who else to turn to. The people at work were too busy with their own agendas, and his family was either too distant or too caught up in the fight. But Rachel was different. She didn't see him as the successful businessman or the man caught up in a legal battle. She saw him as a person who was struggling to do the right thing for the children he loved. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Daniel found himself on the phone with Rachel. He had reached out to her several times, asking for advice about the boys, about how to make them feel more comfortable in their new life, and how to help them navigate the emotions they were dealing with. Rachel always answered with patience and understanding, never rushing him, always willing to listen. "I just don't know if I'm doing enough," Daniel admitted one night, his voice heavy with frustration. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have a clue when it comes to being a father. What if I mess this up? What if they don't feel like they can trust me?" Rachel's voice was soft, but reassuring. "You're doing more than enough, Daniel. The fact that you're there, that you're trying to make a difference in their lives, that's what matters. They need you, and they need to know that you're not going anywhere. The rest will come in time. It's about being consistent, showing up, and being there when they need you." Her words were a lifeline, a beacon of clarity in the midst of his self-doubt. Daniel had never thought of himself as an emotional person, always focused on logic and reason, but Rachel's calm demeanor and understanding had a way of grounding him. It wasn't just about what he could provide materially, it was about being present, emotionally available, and willing to show up for the twins in the ways that mattered most. Over time, Daniel and Rachel's relationship began to deepen. What started as a professional connection between a teacher and a guardian evolved into something comforting and supportive. They had dinner together a few times, discussing everything from the twins' progress at school to the ongoing legal battle. It wasn't romantic, not yet, at least, but there was a bond growing between them, one built on shared purpose and mutual respect. One afternoon, Daniel was picking up the twins from school when he ran into Rachel in the hallway. The boys had excitedly shown her their drawings that morning, and she was waiting by the door, smiling as she greeted Daniel. "They're both doing so well," she said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke about Ryan and Luke. "They've really come out of their shells, Daniel. I can see that they're starting to trust you, to feel like they have a real home." Daniel felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "I just want them to be happy. I want them to know that they're not alone." Rachel placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're doing a wonderful job. You're all they need right now." Her words stayed with him as he drove the twins home that evening. The court dates, the legal strategies, the arguments in the courtroom, all of it seemed so far removed from the life he was building with Ryan and Luke. Yes, the battle was important. Yes, he had to fight for their future. But the real victory was in these small, everyday moments, the laughter, the games, the quiet evenings together as a family. Daniel knew the road ahead was still long, and the legal battle was far from over. Victor wouldn't give up without a fight, and Daniel would have to face many more challenges before he could truly claim his place in the twins' lives. But for now, he had what mattered most: the trust of Ryan and Luke, the growing bond between them, and Rachel's unwavering support. In that moment, as the twins argued over whose turn it was to play video games, Daniel couldn't help but smile. He was building something real with them, something that no one could take away. And in his heart, he knew that this was what family was all about. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Daniel finally decided to go through the last of Michael's belongings. For weeks, the boxes of old letters, photos, and keepsakes had been sitting untouched in his office. The stress of the legal battle for Ryan and Luke, combined with the challenges of running a business, had kept him from dealing with the remnants of his brother's life. But as the battle for guardianship intensified, Daniel felt the weight of his brother's absence more than ever. It was time to confront the past, time to face what Michael had left behind. The boxes were full of familiar things: old family photos, trinkets that had once belonged to their parents, and mementos from the life Michael had built before he passed away. Daniel hadn't been able to bring himself to open them, not until now. The idea of going through Michael's things, of reliving the memories of a time before the loss, had been too much. But now, sitting alone in his office, with the weight of everything pressing down on him, Daniel knew there was no more avoiding it. He started with the first box, carefully lifting the lid, unsure of what he might find inside. As he dug through the items, a stack of letters caught his eye. They were bound together with a simple string, the paper yellowed with age. Daniel's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the handwriting, Michael's familiar, looping script. He hadn't seen it in years. For a moment, Daniel just sat there, staring at the letters, his hand hovering over them. He wasn't sure if he was ready to read what Michael had written, but he knew he couldn't leave them untouched any longer. With a deep breath, Daniel untied the string and unfolded the first letter. The words that followed sent a wave of emotion crashing over him. "Daniel, I don't know how much time I have left, but I need you to know something. I've been thinking about the boys Ryan and Luke. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this, but I have to. If anything happens to me, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll take care of them, that you'll step in as their father. They need you, Dan. They need someone who loves them, someone who will be there when I'm gone. I'm begging you, don't let them grow up without family. I know I've asked a lot of you over the years, but this is the one thing I need you to do for me. I'm counting on you." Daniel's hands trembled as he held the letter. He could feel the weight of Michael's words settle heavily in his chest. The pain of not being able to help his brother then, the regret of not knowing about the boys earlier, it all hit him at once. Michael had been trying to reach him, trying to make sure that Daniel would be there for his children. And now, here Daniel was, facing the responsibility that Michael had hoped he would one day embrace. As Daniel read through each letter, the words became more poignant, more urgent. In every letter, Michael expressed his hopes for the twins' future, his dreams that they would grow up knowing love and security, knowing the importance of family. Michael had written about his struggles, his fears for the twins' future without him, and the deep love he had for them. The letters were filled with emotion, longing, and the quiet desperation of a man who knew he wasn't going to make it to see his children grow up. It was clear that Michael had spent his final months worrying about what would happen to Ryan and Luke, hoping against hope that Daniel would step in when he was no longer able to. One particular letter struck Daniel harder than the rest. It was written just days before Michael's death, and in it, Michael apologized for not reaching out sooner. "Dan, I've been trying to get through to you, but I know you've been busy with work. I can't help but feel guilty for not telling you about Ryan and Luke sooner. You've always been there for me, and I should have trusted you with this. I didn't want to burden you, but now I see that I've done just that. I can only hope that you'll forgive me. You're their uncle, Dan, and I know you have it in you to be the father they need. Please, don't let this be my last regret. Take care of them. Take care of my boys." The words burned in Daniel's chest. Michael's guilt, his apology, it made Daniel's heart ache in a way he couldn't fully explain. He had never known that his brother had been struggling with such deep feelings of inadequacy, that he had been carrying this burden alone. Michael had been trying to reach out, trying to make sure that Daniel would take on the responsibility of the twins, but it had been too late. Reading Michael's words, Daniel felt a shift deep inside him. The legal battle, the pressure of running his company, it all seemed so insignificant now. The real fight was here, in his heart, and it was a fight for the twins' future, for the promise he had made to Michael. Daniel sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the discovery. He had been living his life focused on success, on building a career, on making his mark in the world, but none of it mattered now. His purpose had always been tied to something greater, and Michael had shown him that. He wasn't meant to be alone in this world, and neither were Ryan and Luke. They were his family, and it was his responsibility to step up for them. The guilt Daniel felt was suffocating, but there was also a sense of duty that grew stronger with each passing second. Michael had entrusted him with more than just a name or a legacy. He had entrusted him with the future of two young lives. And as much as Daniel wished he had been there for his brother during his final months, he knew there was no time for regret. What mattered now was honoring Michael's wishes. The letters were a revelation, not just in the sense that they had revealed Michael's hopes and fears, but also in the way they had illuminated the path forward. Daniel couldn't undo the past, but he could choose how to move forward. He had already made a promise to himself that he would fight for Ryan and Luke, but now, reading Michael's heartfelt words, he understood what that promise truly meant. It wasn't just about fighting for guardianship. It was about becoming the father figure Michael had wanted him to be, about stepping into a role he had never anticipated. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, but strangely, Daniel didn't feel burdened by it. There was a clarity now, a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't change the past, but he could create a future where Ryan and Luke knew they were loved, where they were part of a family that had been fractured for so long but was now, at last, coming together. As Daniel carefully folded the last letter and placed it back in the box, he wiped away the tears that had formed in his eyes. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, or what kind of father he would be, but for the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace. He was ready to honor Michael's memory, to be the uncle and father the twins needed. It was time to step up, and Daniel knew he wouldn't let his brother down. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the final confrontation with Victor loomed. For months now, he had been preparing for this moment, but no amount of preparation could make the reality of it any easier. Victor, once his mentor and father figure, was sitting just a few feet away, his smug expression unchanged. The man who had manipulated Daniel's entire life, who had kept him from knowing the truth about his brother's children, was finally going to face the consequences of his actions. Daniel had already learned so much about the dark secrets Victor had kept hidden over the years. He had uncovered the documents that proved Victor had intercepted Michael's calls and letters, the ones that had been designed to keep Daniel from knowing about Ryan and Luke. Victor's lies were now laid bare before the court, but this was the final step, the moment when everything would be revealed, when the truth would come to light. The judge entered the courtroom, and the proceedings began. Daniel's lawyer, Grace, was ready to lay out the case for guardianship, but there was more than just the custody of the twins at stake now. This was about exposing the depth of Victor's manipulation and control over the family, about showing the court the kind of man he truly was. Victor's attorney stood first, trying to maintain the calm, measured tone that had characterized his arguments throughout the case. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Victor Green, has been a loving guardian to Ryan and Luke. He has provided for them and ensured their well-being since their mother's tragic passing. There is no reason to disrupt the life he has given them. Daniel stood from his seat, his jaw clenched. He had been waiting for this moment. This was the time to make his move, to prove that Victor's claims were nothing more than a web of lies. Your Honor, Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This isn't just about what Victor claims. This is about the truth, about the lies and manipulation that have kept these boys from knowing their real family. He looked at Victor across the room, the man who had once been the cornerstone of his life, the one who had raised him after their parents' death, the one he had trusted completely. Now, all of that trust seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the cold reality of what Victor had done. He had kept Daniel from his own flesh and blood, all for the sake of power and control over the family fortune. Victor manipulated everything: my brother's death, the twins' lives, and the inheritance that should have been shared. He lied, he deceived, and now, we're here, fighting for the future of two innocent children because of his actions. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's words echoed in the air, and for the first time, it seemed like the weight of the truth was sinking in. Victor's face remained impassive, but Daniel could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the few moments when Victor thought no one was watching. The man was finally being exposed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Grace continued to present the evidence: Victor's attempts to block Daniel's communications with Michael, his interference with the legal documents, the proof that he had intentionally hidden the twins from Daniel to maintain control. But the clincher came when Rachel, the twins' teacher and Daniel's ally, took the stand. Rachel had become a close confidant of Daniel's over the past few months, offering him the support and advice he needed as he navigated the treacherous waters of the custody battle. She had known the twins since they first arrived at the school, and she had watched them grow from shy, withdrawn children into the confident, happy boys they were becoming now. She spoke with quiet authority as she recounted her experiences with Ryan and Luke, how she had seen the boys struggle with their lack of family, and how Daniel's presence in their lives had slowly begun to heal them. She didn't just talk about the boys' academic progress. She talked about their emotional growth, the change in their demeanor since Daniel had stepped into their lives. They needed him, Rachel said, her voice firm. They needed a father figure, and they needed family. And Daniel has been there for them, every step of the way. I've seen the difference it's made in their lives. These boys deserve to know their family, to have the stability and love that they've been denied for far too long. Her testimony was a turning point. It wasn't just about proving Daniel's suitability as a guardian. It was about showing the court that the twins' emotional well-being had always been at the heart of this case. It wasn't just about money or inheritance or power. It was about giving Ryan and Luke the chance to grow up with the love and support they deserved. The prosecution rested its case, and the courtroom held its collective breath as Victor's attorney rose for his final statement. Your Honor, what you've heard today is a carefully crafted story designed to vilify my client, the lawyer began. Mr. Green has always acted in the best interest of the children. The allegations against him are baseless, and we believe the court should grant him full guardianship, as he has always provided for them. But Victor's lawyer's words were hollow, and the jury could sense it. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was undeniable. Victor had used every trick in the book to manipulate the situation, to keep Daniel from knowing the truth, and now it was all coming to light. The judge adjourned the court for the day, and Daniel felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The battle wasn't over yet, but it was clear that the tide had turned in his favor. He knew that this would be a long, hard fight, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was on the right side of history. That evening, as Daniel sat in his office, preparing for the final hearing, he received a call from Rachel. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of excitement in it. You did it, Daniel, she said. The truth is out there now. The judge has seen through Victor's lies. It's only a matter of time before this is all over. For a moment, Daniel just sat there, taking in her words. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The hardest part was behind him, and with each legal victory, he felt himself getting closer to the ultimate goal, giving Ryan and Luke the family they had always deserved. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork, meetings, and more court dates, but the final ruling came faster than Daniel had expected. The judge ruled in Daniel's favor, granting him full guardianship of the twins. Victor's influence was shattered, his manipulations exposed for all to see. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and disbelief, but Daniel only had eyes for Ryan and Luke, who were sitting quietly beside him, their faces full of hope and relief. As the gavel came down and the ruling was made official, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to be done, still many hurdles to overcome, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he had finally reclaimed something worth fighting for. He had won the battle for Ryan and Luke, but more importantly, he had reclaimed his family. As the years passed, Daniel's life slowly transformed from the fast-paced, corporate-driven existence he had once known to a life rooted in family, love, and deeper purpose. In the beginning, it had been hard to imagine this shift. He was, after all, the successful CEO of a thriving company, the man who had built his entire life around ambition and success. Yet, as he settled into his new role as the guardian of Ryan and Luke, his priorities began to change. Family, once an abstract concept that he hadn't fully embraced, became his anchor. Ryan and Luke had brought a kind of joy into his life that he had never known before. When they had first come into his world, they were quiet, withdrawn, unsure of themselves. But now, years later, they were full of energy and laughter, their personalities blossoming as they found their place in the world. They were no longer just his nephews. They had become his children in every sense of the word. Watching them grow had been nothing short of magical, and he had witnessed the incredible transformation from the uncertain, fragile boys they had been into confident, loving young people. For Daniel, it wasn't just about making sure they had everything they needed physically, it was about giving them something deeper. He wanted to provide them with stability, love, and security, something that had been lacking for them in the past. His mornings no longer started with business calls or meetings with high-profile clients. Instead, they began with the sound of the boys' laughter as they raced down the stairs to join him for breakfast. They had become his world, and he had become theirs. Rachel, too, had become an integral part of his new life. What had started as a supportive relationship between a teacher and a guardian had grown into something much more meaningful. She had been a steady presence in Ryan and Luke's lives from the very beginning, and over time, Daniel had come to rely on her not only for her advice about the boys, but for her emotional support as well. Their relationship deepened into a partnership, one built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and a love for the children they were raising together. As their bond grew stronger, Daniel found himself leaning on Rachel in ways he hadn't expected. They navigated the challenges of parenthood side by side, working together to create a home that was warm and loving. Rachel's kindness and patience had been the perfect complement to Daniel's determination, and together, they built a life that was rich with love, laughter, and the kind of memories that could only be made in a home filled with care. There were difficult moments, of course. Raising two children who had suffered so much loss and upheaval in their early lives was never going to be easy. There were nights when the boys struggled with their emotions, times when the past seemed to resurface in ways that no one had expected. Daniel and Rachel would sit together after the boys went to bed, talking through their frustrations and concerns, figuring out the best ways to support the twins when the weight of their past seemed too much to bear. They learned to navigate the complexities of co-parenting, always putting Ryan and Luke's needs first, always ensuring that their home remained a place of love and understanding. As time went on, Daniel's view of success began to shift. He had spent most of his life focused on climbing the corporate ladder, amassing wealth and prestige. He had believed that his legacy would be defined by his business achievements, by the deals he closed and the companies he helped build. But as he watched Ryan and Luke grow into compassionate, confident young men, he realized that the true measure of his life's success wasn't in his stock options or his professional accomplishments. It was in the family he had built, in the love he had cultivated, and in the memories he had created with the people who mattered most. He found fulfillment in the small moments, the family dinners around the table, the weekends spent on outdoor adventures, the quiet evenings at home when the world outside seemed far away. These were the moments that truly mattered, the moments that defined his legacy in ways that no business deal ever could. He wasn't just building an empire of wealth anymore. He was building an empire of love. The twins had started to realize the depth of their connection to Daniel. As they grew older, they often reflected on how different their lives were now compared to when they first arrived in Daniel's care. They had been scared, unsure of their place in the world, but now they were secure in the knowledge that they were part of a family. They no longer felt the weight of their past so heavily. They had the security of knowing that no matter what happened, they had a father figure in Daniel and a supportive, loving home to call their own. There were still moments when the twins' pasts resurfaced, when the scars of the trauma they had endured before coming to Daniel's home would show. But now, instead of retreating inward, the boys had learned to talk about their feelings, to express their pain and fear. They had Daniel and Rachel to lean on, to help them work through those emotions. They were no longer alone in their grief. They had a family who understood and who was ready to walk with them through the ups and downs of life. In the evenings, after dinner, Daniel would often find himself sitting on the porch with Rachel, watching the boys play in the yard. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter and shouting as Ryan and Luke played their impromptu games, inventing new ways to amuse themselves. It was a scene Daniel had never imagined he would be part of, a scene that he cherished deeply. The air was warm, the evening light soft, and for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he had everything he needed. The life he had once dreamed of, power, influence, wealth, had never felt as meaningful as it did now. The corporate world no longer held the same allure for him. Yes, he still managed his company, but it was no longer the driving force behind his decisions. His priorities had shifted completely. His legacy was no longer tied to the bottom line or the accolades he had received for his business acumen. His legacy, now, was in the love he gave and received from his family. It was in the way he had become the father figure Ryan and Luke needed, and in the way Rachel had stood by him every step of the way. It was in the home they had built together, a home filled with love, laughter, and a deep sense of connection. Looking back, Daniel knew that his journey had not been easy. There had been many obstacles, many challenges, and moments of doubt. But as he watched Ryan and Luke grow into the young men they were becoming, he realized that none of the struggles had been in vain. He had done what he had set out to do. He had provided for them, loved them, and helped them become the best versions of themselves. And that, he thought, as he watched the boys chase each other around the yard, was the true measure of success. His true legacy wasn't in the deals he had made, but in the family he had created, the love he had nurtured, and the memories they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. This was the life he had always been meant to live. This was the legacy he would leave behind. As the years passed, the bond between Daniel and the twins, Ryan and Luke, only deepened. What had started as a somewhat reluctant responsibility taking in two boys he had just discovered existed had gradually transformed into the most meaningful relationship in his life. The relationship between them was no longer just about him being their guardian or father figure. It was about something far more profound. It was a partnership, a mutual learning experience that enriched all of their lives in ways they hadn't expected. Daniel had come into the boys' lives with the firm belief that he would teach them how to be strong, confident individuals, just as any father would. He thought his role would be one of guidance, providing them with structure, discipline, and the lessons he had learned along the way. But as time went on, he realized that Ryan and Luke had just as much to teach him as he did to them. It wasn't always easy. The boys had their moments of rebellion, especially as they entered their teenage years. There were times when they pushed back against the boundaries Daniel had set, when they tested their limits and his patience. At first, Daniel found these moments frustrating. He wanted so badly to be a good father figure to them, but sometimes it felt like his efforts were met with resistance. There were times when they would argue, when the walls they had built around themselves seemed impenetrable. Daniel would lay awake at night, wondering if he was doing enough, wondering if he was ever going to be the parent they needed. But then, in those quiet moments of reflection, Daniel would remember something important. Ryan and Luke had experienced more than most children their age ever should. They had known loss, abandonment, and the pain of growing up without a stable home. Their journey had been one of survival, and now they were learning how to thrive. Daniel's job wasn't just to impose rules and expectations on them. It was to help them feel safe enough to open up, to trust him as a father. In those moments, he realized that it wasn't about the lessons he was trying to teach them, it was about the lessons they were teaching him about patience, compassion, and vulnerability. Ryan, the older of the two, had always been the more reserved one. He held his emotions close, often retreating into himself when things became difficult. It took Daniel a long time to truly understand Ryan's quiet nature. He had spent years thinking that Ryan's silence meant something was wrong, that he wasn't adjusting well to their new life together. But over time, Daniel learned to respect Ryan's need for space, his way of processing the world on his own terms. Ryan had shown him that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was to give them room to grow, to allow them to find their own way in their own time. Luke, on the other hand, was more outgoing and expressive. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and his emotional transparency was both a blessing and a challenge for Daniel. Luke was quick to share his thoughts, but he also struggled with his feelings in ways that often left Daniel feeling helpless. When Luke was upset, he didn't hold back. And while Daniel had always been good at keeping his own emotions in check, Luke had taught him that it was okay to show vulnerability, to admit when things weren't perfect. Luke was a reminder that it was important to be honest with yourself and with the people you loved, even if it was uncomfortable. The more Daniel learned about Ryan and Luke, the more he realized that being a father figure wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being present, being supportive, and sometimes just sitting in the silence with them. The process of building a family wasn't one-sided. It was a partnership between all of them, and everyone had a role to play. As the boys grew older, they each began to take on more responsibilities around the house, helping out with chores, looking out for one another, and even starting to take on the role of mentors to younger kids in their community. Daniel had never expected his life to change in this way. He had always imagined that he would be the one teaching, the one giving advice. But now, he found himself learning from Ryan and Luke just as much as they were learning from him. It was during one of these quiet evenings, when the house was filled with the warmth of a family just enjoying each other's company, that Daniel fully realized how much had changed. The boys were older now, teenagers who had grown from the shy, withdrawn children they had once been into young adults with their own opinions, dreams, and personalities. They had begun to forge their own paths, and Daniel was no longer just their guardian. He was their equal partner in navigating life. One night, after dinner, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sunset together. Daniel had been looking out over the horizon, reflecting on everything that had happened in the years since the boys came into his life, when Ryan broke the silence. "Uncle Daniel," Ryan said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "You've really changed, you know that?" Daniel looked at his nephew, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. "What do you mean?" Ryan shrugged, his hands tucked behind his head. "I don't know. It's just that you've been different. You're not the guy who was all business all the time. You care about us. You're here for us. I can see it." Daniel didn't know how to respond. Hearing Ryan say that, after all the struggles, the doubts, and the fears he had harbored over the years, made all of the hard work feel worthwhile. He had been trying so hard to do everything right, to be the kind of father figure they needed, that he had never stopped to realize how much of an impact his own transformation had made on the boys. Luke, sitting beside Ryan, chimed in with a mischievous grin. "Yeah, I used to think you were just a boring old guy who talked about work all the time. But now I think you're actually cool." Daniel chuckled, feeling a wave of warmth rush over him. The two boys were growing into such fine young men, and he couldn't have been prouder. The pride he felt wasn't just for their achievements, though. It was for who they were becoming: kind, thoughtful, and resilient. They had all learned from each other, and that was something he could never have imagined when they first entered his life. The bond they had formed wasn't just built on blood, it was built on trust, love, and mutual respect. The definition of family had changed for Daniel. It wasn't just about genetics or who shared the same last name. It was about the people you chose to be there for, the ones you built a life with, and the relationships you nurtured along the way. Family was no longer a concept that Daniel had to chase after or try to earn. It was something he had cultivated every single day. Through the ups and downs, the laughter and the tears, the quiet moments of connection and the chaotic moments of growth. He had learned to embrace the idea that family wasn't just who you were born to. It was who you chose to love and who chose to love you back. The years ahead would undoubtedly bring more challenges. There would be more obstacles to face, more growing pains to navigate, but Daniel felt confident in the family they had built. As he looked at Ryan and Luke, his heart swelled with pride. He wasn't just their uncle anymore. He was their father figure, their protector, and, most importantly, their partner in life. Together, they had forged an unbreakable bond, one that would carry them through whatever the future held. And for the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to truly belong, to be part of something bigger than himself, something that was built on love, trust, and the deep, unshakable bond of family. Life often leads us down unexpected paths, and we come to realize that what truly matters is not what we achieve, but the relationships we build along the way. Family is not just about those we are born to. It's about the people we choose to love and care for. Even as we grow older, each day is an opportunity to strengthen and nurture these bonds. As we age, the greatest lesson we can learn is that love and connection with others are what give life its deepest meaning. Don't let past regrets or worries overshadow the value of the present. Cherish the precious moments with family, friends, and loved ones. It's the love, understanding, and mutual support that truly define a fulfilling life. Ultimately, these relationships are the legacy we leave behind, the proof of a life well lived. These bonds provide the strength and peace that sustain us, no matter our age. Thank you for watching. We hope this adoption story touched your heart. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe to Stories TH, and click the notification bell for more amazing content. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.